The postman and the letter in a quiet town nestled between rolling hills and cobblestone streets. There lived a man named Elias Rowan. He was not known for wealth or fame, but for his punctuality. Every morning at dawn, you could hear the soft creak of his bicycle wheels and the rhythmic jingle of letters in his bag. Elias was the town's postman for nearly 30 years. His life moved with the calm of a clock's pendulum, steady, predictable, and silent. He lived alone in a small stone cottage at the edge of the town square, where ivy curled over the windows and the scent of old books filled the air. Each day, he carried dreams written in ink confessions, rejections, promises, and goodbyes, but none were ever meant for him. He often thought that his life existed between envelopes, between other people's happiness. One misty morning, in the early spring of 1962, a new letter caught his attention. It was sealed in blue wax with delicate handwriting, the kind that seemed to float on paper. The address read, "To Miss Clara Whitmore, Rose Hill Lane, Apartment 2B. The return address was smudged, but one word was clear: Cambridge. Elias smiled faintly. He knew Miss Clara. Everyone did. She was the piano teacher who lived above the flower shop, a quiet, kind woman who always wore blue ribbons in her hair and left her window open to let the sound of her piano drift into the streets. He placed the letter gently in his bag and began his route. By noon, the streets shimmered with sunlight. Children ran past with wooden toys. Shopkeepers called out prices, and somewhere a violin played. It was an ordinary day until Elias reached Rose Hill Lane. He parked his bicycle beside the flower shop, straightened his hat, and climbed the narrow stairs to apartment 2B. He knocked once. No answer. He knocked again, softer, still silence. He turned the doorknob, only to find a small note pinned beside the door, "Out of town for the week. Kindly leave letters with Mrs. Bloom downstairs." Elias nodded, sighed, and went back down. But Mrs. Bloom wasn't at her counter, only her daughter, a cheerful girl of 10, arranging bouquets. Not wanting to risk misplacing something so delicate, Elias decided to return the next day. He placed the letter carefully inside his coat pocket, and that night, for reasons he couldn't explain, he placed it on his bedside table instead of the usual postbox tray. The next morning, he thought of Clara as he cycled past her window. He imagined her receiving the letter, perhaps a love letter from someone far away, or maybe a proposal. A small pang of envy touched him, though he quickly dismissed it. Still, he couldn't help but wonder what the letter contained. That evening, he returned to Rose Hill Lane, but Clara's window was still closed, her curtains drawn. Another day passed, then another. The blue envelope remained untouched. Weeks slipped into months. The letter aged with dust, its corners softening, its scent fading. And in that quiet neglect, Elias felt something shift inside him, a strange connection to the unopened letter, as though it carried not just words, but a heartbeat waiting to be heard. Years passed. Clara returned to town once or twice, always graceful, always polite. But Elias could never bring himself to hand her the letter. Something in his heart resisted. Maybe it was fear that if he delivered it, whatever story it carried would end. Or maybe it was love, the quiet, impossible kind that grows not from meeting, but from longing. So he kept it, hidden inside a drawer lined with maps and stamps, beside old coins and postcards. And every night before sleep, his eyes would drift toward it, that small blue envelope that never reached its home. Clara Whitmore returned to the little town of Alderbury after almost 2 years away. The streets hadn't changed. The bakery still smelled of warm bread. The clock tower still chimed every hour, and the same old man still sold apples near the square. But to Clara, everything felt slightly faded, as if time had taken a thin brush and painted a layer of distance over her memories. She had gone to London to chase dreams that never quite bloomed, music recitals that led nowhere, promises from patrons that faded, letters from friends that grew fewer with each passing month. Eventually, when her mother fell ill, Clara had packed her bags and come back home. Now, she lived again above the flower shop, apartment 2B, the same cozy little room with lace curtains and sunlight spilling through the window each morning dot she reopened her piano lessons, played in the evenings for the children, and sometimes sang to herself when the world outside grew quiet. The townsfolk were kind, but Clara often felt the weight of solitude pressing softly upon her, the kind that doesn't ache, but lingers. Every morning, she would open her window and watch the postman ride past. Elias Rowan, always punctual, always polite. She had seen him for years, yet barely spoken to him beyond a good morning. There was something steady about him, something safe. He never seemed rushed, never distracted. When he handed her mail, he'd give a small nod, almost shyly, as though he feared disturbing her peace. One spring afternoon, Clara was sitting by the piano when she noticed him pause outside her building longer than usual. He looked up, perhaps thinking she wasn't there. For a brief moment, their eyes met, and in that glance, Clara saw something fragile, like an unspoken story behind his quiet demeanor. Then he looked away, adjusted his hat, and cycled off. Days passed. Then weeks. But for reasons she couldn't explain, that simple moment stayed with her. Clara began to notice small things about Elias, the way he always fixed fallen letters in mailboxes, how he helped Mrs. Bloom carry flower baskets, how he stopped to feed the stray cat by the bakery. He was ordinary, yes, but in a world full of noise. His simplicity was rare. Sometimes she wondered if he had a family. Sometimes she thought of asking, but she never did. That summer, the town prepared for its annual fair. Colorful tents filled the square, music played through the evenings, and lights glittered along the riverbank. Clara volunteered to perform a small piano recital, her first in years. When she arrived that night, dressed in a soft blue dress, she scanned the crowd nervously. Then she saw him, Elias, standing near the back, holding his cap in his hands. Their eyes met again, this time longer. She smiled. He nodded. And when her fingers touched the keys, the melody flowed like a confession too tender to be spoken aloud. After the performance, Clara stepped outside for air. The moon hung low, and the scent of roses from the flower stalls filled the night. She found Elias by the bridge, quietly looking at the water. Double quotes, Mr. Rowan, she said softly. He turned, startled. Miss Whitmore, you played beautifully. Thank you. She smiled. Do you like music? He hesitated. I like listening to it. It carries feelings I don't always know how to say. She looked at him curiously, then said, That's exactly why I play. A silence settled between them, comfortable, like a pause between two musical notes. Then Clara spoke again. You've been the town's postman for as long as I can remember. He nodded. 30 years this winter. That's a lifetime of other people's words, she said softly. He smiled faintly. Yes, but sometimes I think I'm just a bridge between hearts. Letters carry what voices cannot. Her eyes softened. That's a beautiful way to put it. He looked at her as if wanting to say something more, something about a letter that still waited in his drawer. But he only said, "Good night, Miss Whitmore," and walked away. Clara watched him disappear down the lantern-lit path, her heart unexpectedly heavy. That night, as she sat by the window, she thought of how strange it was to live so close to someone, see them every day, yet never truly know their story. Weeks passed again. Elias continued his deliveries. Clara continued her lessons. Autumn painted the streets in amber and gold. One evening, Clara received a parcel from London, an invitation to perform in a small concert. Her students cheered, but inside she felt uncertain. She was older now, quieter. Perhaps that part of her life had ended that night. She found herself writing not to anyone specific, but to the feeling she couldn't name. Dear someone, there are people we meet only in passing, yet somehow they stay in our hearts like forgotten songs. I don't know why I'm writing this or for whom, but if you ever find this letter, know that silence too can mean affection. She folded the letter neatly, sealed it, and placed it in her drawer. She didn't know that only a few streets away, another letter, one written years ago, was lying in another drawer, waiting for her name to be called. That winter, Clara felt ill for a few weeks. The cold air made her cough, and she stayed indoors mostly. Elias, concerned, began slipping small notes into her mailbox, unsigned, simple. Kind, the roses outside your window are still blooming. The children miss your piano. The town feels quieter without your music. She never knew who wrote them, but she smiled each time. The handwriting was neat, gentle, familiar somehow. When she recovered, she began leaving short notes in reply. Thank you. Kind stranger, the roses seem brighter after your words. Whoever you are, your letters bring warmth. And so, without meeting, they began a silent exchange, one note at a time. Two lonely souls speaking through words they couldn't voice aloud. Neither of them knew that destiny was already weaving their stories together, thread by thread, word by word. Time at Alderbury moved like the turning of an old music box, slow, steady, and filled with the soft echoes of lives quietly unfolding. The world beyond the hills changed. Radios became televisions. Telegrams turned into telephones. But in this little town, letters were still sacred things. Dot and Elias Rowan still delivered them all. The blue envelope remained in his drawer. Years had dusted its surface, softening the ink, fading the wax seal. Yet every time Elias opened the drawer to collect his root papers, his eyes would linger there, on the one letter he could never deliver. Dot at first. He told himself he was just waiting for the right moment. Then he said perhaps it was too late, that maybe the sender had forgotten or Clara had moved on. But deep down, Elias knew the truth. He simply couldn't bear to let go of it. Dot, because in that unopened letter, he found something that belonged to both of them, a secret bridge between his heart and hers. He never opened it, never dared. But sometimes he traced the outline of her name, Clara Whitmore, written in those graceful loops of ink, and whisper softly, maybe tomorrow. Clara, meanwhile, had fallen into a rhythm of quiet days. Her piano lessons continued. Her laughter filled the flower shop again, and sometimes she performed small recitals in the town hall. She became the woman everyone admired, graceful, composed, always smiling, but in the stillness of her room, her thoughts often drifted toward the man who had once left kind notes in her mailbox. She never discovered his name, though she suspected. Sometimes when she'd hear the soft jingle of a bicycle outside, she'd glance toward the window, and there he would be, Elias Rowan, cycling past with letters, fluttering in his bag. She would wave, he would tip his hat, and the world would move on. 1,000 unspoken words carried away with the morning wind one evening. As the first snow of winter began to fall, Elias stopped at the corner of Rosehill Lane. The world looked softer then, rooftops dusted white, chimney smoke curling gently into the twilight sky. He saw her through the window, Clara, sitting at her piano, her hair glowing gold in the lamplight. The melody she played was tender, full of longing. Like something reaching across the years, he stood there for a long while, listening. When she finally noticed him, she smiled faintly, then continued playing as if inviting him to stay. He didn't move closer, didn't speak. He just listened until the last note faded into the snow dot. Then he whispered to himself, "That's enough." Seasons passed like pages in an old diary. Spring brought wildflowers. Summer brought children's laughter. Autumn brought the quiet sound of rain tapping against the window panes. And through it all, Elias continued his work, though his steps grew slower, his hair grayer, and his breath a little shorter with each climb up the cobbled hills. Clara noticed. "Mr. Rowan," she said one morning when he handed her a stack of mail, "you look tired. Do you ever rest?" He smiled. "Letters don't wait, Miss Whitmore." She frowned gently. "But you should. The town would understand." He looked at her, those same kind eyes that had seen her grow from a young teacher into a woman of grace. "I rest," he said softly, "every time I hear your music." She paused, startled by the tenderness in his voice, but he quickly looked away after he left. She stood at her window for a long time, thinking. That year, Elias turned 63. The town council held a small ceremony for his years of service. People clapped, cheered, and offered him gifts. Clara attended, bringing him a small box tied with blue ribbon. Inside was a silver pen, engraved with the words, "For the man who carried everyone's words and still listened." Elias was moved beyond words. "Thank you," he said quietly. "It means more than you know." She smiled. "You've been a part of all our stories, Mr. Rowan." He looked down. "Perhaps one day I'll find mine too." That night, as he sat by the fire, Elias took out the blue envelope once more. He turned it in his hands, feeling the weight of all the years between then and now. The wax seal had cracked slightly. Time had done what courage could not. He almost opened it. But then a knock on the door. He quickly hid the letter away and opened the door to find Mrs. Bloom's daughter, now grown, holding a small package. "Mr. Rowan," she said kindly, "Miss Whitmore asked me to bring this. She said it's for someone who's always delivered hope." Inside the box was a small folded paper, a note. "Dear friend, if ever you feel forgotten, remember this. Some hearts recognize kindness even without knowing its name." He smiled, a trembling, grateful smile. The next morning, he placed a single white rose on Clara's doorstep before starting his route. She found it hours later and knew. She didn't need a note to understand. The years kept moving. Elias grew frail. His bicycle rides became shorter, his hands shook when sorting letters. But he continued until his final day on duty, the day the post office gave him a gold badge for his lifetime of service. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, he sat by his window and looked at the old letter one last time. It had been 40 years since he received it. 40 years of waiting, 40 years of wondering. 40 years of love. Quiet and unspoken. He whispered, "I should have delivered you long ago, shouldn't I?" And perhaps the wind heard him, for it brushed softly through the open window, rustling the papers on his desk, as if the universe itself sighed in agreement. Far across town, Clara still played her piano each evening. Her hair was silver now, her eyes gentle with time. Sometimes as she played, she'd pause suddenly as if she could feel someone thinking of her, and somewhere, deep in Elias's drawer, the blue letter waited. Not forgotten. Just waiting for the right hands at the right time to open it. The winter of 2002 came quietly to Alderbury. Snow fell like drifting memories, covering the old cobblestone streets and the rooftops that had seen decades of sunrise and goodbye. The little town had grown smaller now. Most of its young people had gone away to cities, and only the old ones remained, walking with stories tucked behind their smiles. And in a modest stone cottage at the end of the square, the old postman, Elias Rowan, now 75, sat by the window, the same window where he had watched countless mornings begin. His bicycle leaned against the wall, rusted with time. His uniform hung neatly in the corner, folded like a memory he couldn't yet put away. Beside his chair lay a wooden box, his life's collection, stamps from foreign countries, faded postcards, newspaper clippings, and at the very bottom, that blue envelope, the one that had outlived youth, seasons, and reason. He picked it up with trembling hands. The wax seal was brittle now, the paper yellowed at the edges. But Clara's name was still there, still clear. Miss Clara Whitmore, Rose Hill Lane, apartment 2B. He smiled faintly. "You've waited long enough," he whispered. For the first time in 40 years, Elias decided he would open it. He lit a small lamp, took a deep breath, and carefully broke the old seal. Inside was a single folded sheet of paper. He opened it slowly. His eyes read the words, and the room grew silent. "My dearest Clara, when you read this, I may already be gone. I have little time left, and yet there are things I must say before silence claims me. I loved you from the moment you sat beside me under the old willow by the river. Do you remember? You played a tune on your little piano notebook, and I promised that one day I'd write you a song to match it. Life took us in different directions, and I could never tell you what my heart carried. But you were, and will always be, the gentlest part of my soul. I'm leaving for Cambridge tomorrow, and the doctors say I may not return. I wanted you to know before it's too late that you were my only love, my only prayer, my only peace. If this letter never finds you, I hope the world is kind to you, and that you smile when you think of me. Jonathan Reed." Elias stared at the name at the bottom of the page. Jonathan Reed. He remembered that name. Jonathan had been a young writer from town years ago, Clara's childhood friend. He left for university, then vanished during an illness that swept through Cambridge. Elias had been the postman then. He had picked up the letter one spring morning, a letter from Jonathan to Clara, and never delivered it. He closed his eyes, feeling the weight of decades collapse onto his heart. The letter had not been his to keep. Yet in keeping it, he had unknowingly kept Clara from hearing her final goodbye from the man she once loved. He whispered, voice breaking, "Oh, Clara, what have I done?" That night, Elias could not sleep. The letter lay open on the table, its words glowing in lamplight like a confession from another lifetime. He thought of all the years he'd spent guarding it, out of fear, out of love, out of something he could never name. And he realized then, love is not about keeping. It's about freeing what was never ours to hold dot by dawn. A decision had taken root in his heart. He would deliver it. Even if it was 40 years too late. The next morning, Elias walked slowly through the snow-covered streets toward Rose Hill Lane. His hands trembled, but his resolve was steady. The town was quiet, only the sound of his footsteps echoing through the winter-aired dot when he reached apartment 2B. He paused. The flower shop below had changed. Mrs. Bloom had passed years ago, and her daughter now ran it. The window upstairs was still the same, though. Lace curtains, a faint golden glow behind them. He climbed the familiar stairs and knocked. A moment later, the door opened, and there she was, Clara Whitmore. Her hair was silver now, her frame frail but graceful. Time had etched its gentle marks upon her face, but her eyes, those same blue, thoughtful eyes, were as kind as ever. For a long moment neither spoke. Then she smiled softly. "Mr. Rowan, it's been so long." Elias nodded. "Too long?" She gestured for him to come inside. The room smelled of tea and lavender, and her piano still sat by the window, keys polished. Waiting dot, she poured him tea, and they sat quietly, the years between them hanging like dust in sunlight. Finally, Elias spoke. His voice shook. "Miss Whitmore, I've brought you something. Something I should have given you a very long time ago." He held out the blue envelope. Clara's eyes widened as she took it gently in her hands. "This handwriting," she whispered. Yes, Elias said quietly. "Jonathan Reed." Her hands trembled. I thought he forgot me." Elias lowered his gaze. "He didn't, I did. I was meant to deliver it that spring, but I never did. I kept it. I don't know why. Maybe I was afraid. Maybe I was selfish." Tears welled in her eyes, but her voice remained calm. "Why now, Elias?" He swallowed. "Because I finally learned that love isn't keeping someone close. It's letting them find peace." She stared at the letter for a long time before slowly opening it. Her eyes moved across the page, once, twice, and then tears began to fall softly onto the paper. When she finished reading, she smiled faintly, not with sorrow, but with quiet acceptance. "Jonathan," she whispered, "after all these years." Elias sat silently, hands clasped, waiting for her to speak again. She finally looked at him and said, "Thank you for bringing it. Even if it's late. Some words are worth waiting a lifetime for." He nodded, tears glimmering in his tired eyes. "I'm sorry, Clara." She reached across the table and placed her hand over his. "Don't be. Maybe it reached me exactly when it was meant to." They sat together for a while, watching the snowfall outside the window. Two old souls, bound by fate, forgiveness, and the fragile beauty of what was lost and found again. That evening, as Elias walked home through the twilight, he felt lighter than he had in years. The letter had finally reached her. The silence between them had been broken, and though he knew his years were nearing their end, he also knew some hearts only find peace when they finish the last delivery of their lives. He looked toward the fading sun and whispered, "Thank you for letting me be the messenger, even at the end." Winter melted slowly that year. The snow that once covered Alderbury's rooftops began to fade, revealing cobblestone paths wet with morning dew. The river unfroze, whispering again through the valley. And inside her small apartment above the flower shop, Clara Whitmore sat by her window, the blue letter resting on her lap like a fragile piece of yesterday. She had read it many times. Each time her tears came softer. Each time her smile grew warmer. The words no longer hurt. They healed. Jonathan Reed's handwriting, the way he had written her name, the way his final line trembled with love, reminded her that once she had been someone's reason to live, someone's last thought. And even though that love had never reached her in time, its arrival now, through Elias, felt like a message from destiny itself. For days afterward, Clara thought about Elias Rowan, the quiet postman who had carried the world's words and yet never spoken his own. She had seen in his eyes that day guilt, yes, but also something deeper, something tender. She wanted to thank him properly, not for the letter, but for the decades of care he'd given without asking for anything in return. So one morning, she began to write her own letter this time. "Dear Elias, I have read Jonathan's words again and again, and each time they sound less like sorrow and more like music that was waiting to be heard. You carried that melody with you all these years. I don't know if you realize how much kindness that took. Perhaps God chose you, not to deliver it on time, but to protect it until I was ready. So this is not a letter of blame. It's a letter of gratitude. You've given me peace, the peace of knowing that I was loved once, and that love, in some quiet form, has stayed near me all my life. Thank you, Elias, for being the messenger of unfinished stories. Yours sincerely, Clara." She sealed it carefully, tied it with a blue ribbon, and placed it inside a white envelope. But instead of handing it to him herself, she decided to do something different, something that felt more like fate. She left it in the post office. Elias came by the next morning, as he often did, to drop off letters for the new postman who had taken over his route. Retirement had made his hands restless, so the young workers still welcomed his help. Sorting table, he saw it, a white envelope addressed neatly in that unmistakable handwriting. To Mr. Elias Rowan. He froze. For a moment, he couldn't breathe. He picked it up gently, his heart beating faster than it had in years. He knew immediately who had written it. He sat by the window, sunlight warming his face, and opened the envelope. As his eyes traced Clara's words, tears welled silently. He read it once, then again, then held it against his chest. After so many years of silence, someone had finally written to him. And not just anyone, the woman whose name had lived in his heart for half a lifetime. That evening, Elias went to see Clara. When she opened the door, she smiled, not surprised, almost as if she had been expecting him. "You read it?" she asked softly. He nodded, voice unsteady. "Yes, I did." She gestured for him to sit by the piano. "I didn't know what else to give you," she said. "You've spent your whole life delivering other people's words. I thought maybe someone should finally write to you." Elias chuckled through his tears. "You already did, every note you ever played." Clara's eyes softened. "You've listened all these years, haven't you?" He nodded. "Every evening your music was the only sound that made me feel I hadn't lived in vain." A silence settled between them, gentle, full of things that didn't need to be said. Then Clara stood and placed a sheet of paper on the piano stand. "I've written something," she said. "Would you like to hear it?" Elias nodded. Her fingers touched the keys, and a melody began, soft, pure, aching, and hopeful all at once. It rose and fell like a letter being read aloud by the wind. When the song ended, she looked at him and smiled. "It's called The Letter That Finally Arrived." He smiled back. "It's beautiful." She took a deep breath. "Elias, have you ever loved someone you never told?" He looked down at his hands, wrinkled and still trembling slightly. "All my life," he said quietly. Her eyes glistened. "I thought so." He laughed faintly, embarrassed, but she reached out and held his hand. "I know," she whispered. "I always knew." That winter, Elias began to visit Clara often. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they didn't. Sometimes he helped her water the plants or fix small things around the house. Other times he simply sat and listened to her play. Neighbors began to notice the old postman and the piano teacher. Walking together in the evenings, slow steps, gentle laughter, two old souls finally at ease. Neither of them called it love. They didn't need to dot, it was something quieter, like a promise fulfilled long after the world had stopped expecting it. One morning, months later, Clara received a small brown envelope in her mailbox. The handwriting was shaky but familiar. She opened it slowly. "Dear Clara, there's a peace that comes when we finally deliver what we were meant to. I think I've found mine. You once said some hearts recognize kindness even without knowing its name. I think mine knew yours long before I could admit it. If my days grow shorter, please remember every moment I've spent hearing your music has been enough for a lifetime. Yours always, Elias." Clara pressed the letter to her heart. She didn't cry this time. She simply smiled, the same way. People smile when they know that love, in its truest form, has completed its circle. That spring, the flower shop below her window bloomed brighter than ever. Each morning, Clara would place a single blue flower in a vase by her piano, open her window, and play that same melody, the letter that finally arrived, and if you passed by Rose Hill Lane on a quiet morning, you might swear you heard a second sound, a faint echo of bicycle bells in the distance, as though the old postman was still delivering letters somewhere beyond the hills. Years passed. Alderbury changed, slowly, quietly, like pages turning in a book no one realized was still being written. The old post office became a bakery, its wooden sign now painted cream and gold. The flower shop below Clara's window was still there, blooming every spring. As if remembering Dot, and though Elias Rowan's bicycle no longer rang its bell through the morning mist. People still said that if you stood near the river bridge at dawn, you could almost hear it faint and far away, echoing through the valley like a heartbeat of time. Clara Whitmore lived to see many more springs. She continued teaching piano to children, bright, curious faces who filled her little apartment with laughter and songs. Among them was a boy named Noah, barely 10 years old, with freckles across his nose and a spark in his eyes that reminded her of someone she couldn't quite name. He loved letters. While other children ran off after class, Noah stayed behind, folding small paper envelopes and pretending to mail them. One day, Clara asked, smiling, "And who are all these letters for, Noah?" He looked up shyly. "For people who forgot they were loved, Miss Clara. My grandpa says everyone should get a letter someday, even if it comes late." Clara's heart stilled. "Your grandpa sounds very wise," she said softly. "What's his name?" The boy grinned. Rowan, Grandpa Elias Rowan. For a long moment, she couldn't speak. The air around her felt lighter, almost shimmering. She knelt to meet his eyes, those same gentle eyes she had seen once before, in another lifetime. Do you know what your grandfather used to do? She asked, voice trembling. He nodded proudly. He was a postman. He said letters are like little miracles. They always find their way when the heart is ready. Clara smiled, tears forming, but her heart full. Yes, Noah, she whispered. Your grandfather was right. That day, Clara gave Noah something special, a folded sheet of old paper tied with a blue ribbon. This, she said, is a song. It's called The Letter That Finally Arrived. I wrote it a long time ago for a dear friend. Would you like to learn it? The boy nodded eagerly. His small fingers stumbled across the keys at first, but slowly the melody began to take shape, soft, uncertain, yet full of promise, and as he played, Clara closed her eyes. In the music, she could almost feel Elias there beside her again, smiling, listening, his spirit woven through every note. Months later, when the town held its spring recital, Noah played that same song on the grand piano in Alderbury Hall. The melody floated through the room like sunlight, pure, hopeful, timeless. And in the crowd, many wept without knowing why. For some reason, that music felt familiar, like a memory carried by the wind. After the recital, Noah ran up to Clara, clutching the worn blue ribbon in his hand. Miss Clara, he said breathlessly, Grandpa used to tell me a story about a letter that took years to reach its home. Was that your story? Clara smiled gently. Yes, Noah, I suppose it was. But now it's yours. He tilted his head, confused. Mine? Yes, she said. Because love, real love, never belongs to one person. It travels. It finds new hearts to live in. And sometimes the children of destiny are the ones who finish what time began. That evening, Clara wrote one last letter. Her handwriting was slower now, but still elegant. Dear Elias, the boy plays beautifully. He carries your kindness in every note. I think our story has found its next chapter. In him. Thank you for returning the letter to me all those years ago. In doing so, you gave it to the world. Love always finds its way, doesn't it? Yours, Clara. She placed the letter on the windowsill next to a single blue flower. The wind lifted the edge of the page, almost as if someone unseen was reaching out to take it. And as the sun set over Alderbury, the letter fluttered softly, carried by the breeze, flying across the fields, over the river toward the horizon. Years later, people still told stories in the town about the pianist who played every morning, about the postman who never stopped delivering kindness, and about a boy who grew up to compose music that touched the world, songs about time, hope, and letters that always find their way home. Some called it coincidence. Others called it fate. But those who knew the truth smiled quietly and said they were the children of destiny, bound not by time, but by the letters love leaves behind.